On a cold March evening in 1770, snow and anger mixed in the narrow streets of Boston. No one there could have known that within 5 years, 13 British colonies would be at war with the most powerful empire on earth. What began as arguments over taxes and rights would ignite into a revolution that reshaped the modern world. This is how the American Revolution began, step by step, decision by decision, spark by spark. The story truly begins long before the first gunshot. By the mid-1700s, Britain had established 13 colonies along the eastern coast of North America. These colonies, stretching from Massachusetts in the north to Georgia in the south, were populated by farmers, merchants, artisans, and enslaved Africans. Though they were British subjects, many colonists had grown used to managing their own affairs through local assemblies. They paid taxes to their colonial governments and saw themselves as loyal to the crown, but also accustomed to a degree of self-rule. Then came the great global conflict, known as the French and Indian War. From 1754 to 1763, Britain and France fought for control of North America. The war was brutal and expensive. British troops, alongside colonial militias, eventually defeated France, gaining vast territories. On the surface, this was a victory for the British Empire and its colonies. But beneath that triumph lay a massive problem: debt. Britain had spent enormous sums financing the war. By 1763, the empire was deeply in debt and maintaining troops in North America to protect newly acquired lands. British officials believed it was only fair that the colonists, who had benefited from the war, should help pay the costs. In 1765, Parliament passed the Stamp Act. This law required colonists to pay a direct tax on printed materials, newspapers, legal documents, licenses, even playing cards. Unlike previous trade regulations, this was an internal tax. It struck at the heart of colonial society. The reaction was swift and furious. Colonists argued that they had no representatives in Parliament. Their rallying cry became clear: no taxation without representation. They believed only their own colonial assemblies had the right to tax them. Groups such as the Sons of Liberty formed, organizing protests and sometimes violent resistance. Effigies of tax collectors were burned. Stamp distributors resigned under pressure. Faced with intense opposition and economic boycotts that hurt British merchants, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act in 1766. For a brief moment, tensions eased, but the underlying issue, who had the authority to govern and tax the colonies, remained unresolved. In 1767, Parliament passed the Townshend Acts, placing duties on imported goods like glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea. Once again, colonists responded with boycotts. Women played a crucial role, producing homespun cloth to replace British imports. Resistance spread through pamphlets, speeches, and town meetings. British authorities responded by sending troops to Boston to maintain order. The presence of red-coated soldiers in a civilian city heightened tensions daily. Arguments between soldiers and civilians became common. Then came the night of March 5, 1770, the Boston Massacre. A confrontation between colonists and British soldiers escalated. Snowballs, some filled with ice or debris, were thrown. Insults were shouted. Suddenly, shots rang out. 5 colonists lay dead or dying. Patriot leaders quickly seized upon the incident. Engravings by Paul Revere portrayed the event as a deliberate slaughter of innocent civilians. Though the reality was more chaotic, the political impact was enormous. The incident hardened attitudes on both sides. Parliament eventually repealed most of the Townshend duties, except for one, the tax on tea. The tea tax remained as a symbol of Parliament's authority. By 1773, the British East India Company was struggling financially. To save it, Parliament passed the Tea Act, allowing the company to sell tea directly to the colonies at a lower price, but still taxed. Many colonists saw this as a trick to make them accept Parliament's right to tax. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water. This dramatic protest became known as the Boston Tea Party. It was a bold, calculated act of defiance. Britain's response was severe. In 1774, Parliament passed what colonists called the Intolerable Acts, officially known as the Coercive Acts. Boston Harbor was closed. Massachusetts self-government was curtailed. British officials accused of crimes could be tried in Britain. Troops could be quartered in private homes. Rather than isolating Massachusetts, these measures united the colonies. In September 1774, representatives from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. They debated how to respond. Some hoped for reconciliation. Others were beginning to consider independence. Among those present was a tall Virginian with military experience, George Washington. At this stage, even he did not openly call for independence. Most delegates still identified as loyal British subjects seeking redress of grievances. But events were moving faster than words. In early 1775, tensions reached a breaking point. British General Thomas Gage, the military governor of Massachusetts, received orders to suppress rebellion and seize colonial weapons stored in Concord. On April 18, 1775, writers spread the alarm that British troops were marching. One of them was Paul Revere, racing through the countryside to warn that the British are coming. At dawn on April 19th, British troops encountered colonial militia in Lexington. A shot was fired. No one knows by whom. This shot heard around the world marked the beginning of open warfare at the battles of Lexington and Concord. The colonial militias, later called Minutemen, harassed British troops as they retreated to Boston. What had begun as political protest had now turned into armed rebellion. In May 1775, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. This time, the mood was different. Fighting had begun. The Congress took the extraordinary step of creating a Continental Army and appointing George Washington as its commander-in-chief. Washington faced enormous challenges. The army was poorly trained, under-equipped, and lacked a stable source of funding. Yet the very act of forming a unified army signaled that the colonies were moving beyond protest toward revolution. Meanwhile, many colonists were rethinking their relationship with Britain. Pamphlets circulated widely, none more influential than Common Sense by Thomas Paine, published in January 1776. Paine argued boldly that monarchy was corrupt and that America should seek complete independence. His words electrified public opinion. By the summer of 1776, the idea of independence had gained overwhelming support in Congress. A committee was appointed to draft a declaration. Its principal author was Thomas Jefferson. On July 4, 1776, Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It accused King George III of tyranny and formally announced that the colonies were free and independent states. The revolution had fully begun, not just as a war, but as a radical political transformation. What makes the start of the American Revolution so astonishing is how incremental it was. There was no single moment when everyone agreed to break away. Instead, it unfolded step by step. War debt, taxation, protest, confrontation, violence, unity, armed resistance, and finally, independence. It was a story shaped by merchants boycotting British goods, women spinning cloth in their homes, printers spreading revolutionary ideas, farmers drilling as militia, and politicians debating the meaning of liberty. It was also a story filled with contradictions. Liberty proclaimed in a society that still tolerated slavery. Unity forged among colonies with deep regional differences. By the time independence was declared, the conflict had already become a global war involving France and other European powers. But in its earliest phase, the revolution was a deeply American struggle over rights, representation, and identity. The snow in Boston had melted long ago. The tea in the harbor had dissolved. The gun smoke at Lexington had drifted away. Yet from those moments emerged a new nation, one born not from sudden impulse, but from a chain of escalating events that transformed loyal subjects into revolutionaries. And that is how the American Revolution began, not with a single shout of defiance, but with a long, mounting argument over who had the right to rule and who had the courage to resist. The Declaration of Independence did not end the struggle, it intensified it. When the delegates signed their names beneath the bold words drafted by Thomas Jefferson, they were not merely protesting. They were committing treason in the eyes of the British Crown. If captured, they could be executed. The stakes had risen from political argument to existential survival. News of the Declaration spread rapidly through the colonies. Public readings were held in town squares. Church bells rang. Crowds gathered to cheer. In New York City, a statue of King George III was pulled down and melted into bullets. Symbolism turned into ammunition, literally. Yet enthusiasm did not guarantee victory. The British Empire was still the most formidable military power in the world. Its navy controlled the seas. Its army was professional, disciplined, and battle-hardened. By contrast, the Continental Army under George Washington consisted largely of farmers, tradesmen, and volunteers, with limited training and inconsistent supplies. In the summer of 1776, Britain launched a massive campaign to crush the rebellion. a powerful fleet arrived in New York Harbor, carrying thousands of troops, including German mercenaries known as Hessians. The British strategy was clear: seize New York, divide the colonies by controlling the Hudson River, and isolate New England, the heart of rebellion. The result was devastating for the Americans. Washington's forces were outmaneuvered in the Battle of Long Island. Forced to retreat across Brooklyn, Manhattan, and eventually into New Jersey, the Continental Army suffered defeats that nearly ended the Revolution in its infancy. Morale plummeted, soldiers deserted, enlistments expired. By late 1776, the revolutionary cause appeared close to collapse. Then, in one of the most daring decisions of the war, Washington gambled everything. On the icy night of December 25, 1776, he led his army across the Delaware River in a surprise attack on Hessian forces stationed in Trenton. The crossing was treacherous: floating ice, freezing wind, exhausted men. But the attack succeeded. The Americans captured nearly 1,000 Hessian soldiers. This victory at Trenton, followed by another at Princeton, revitalized the revolutionary cause. It proved that the Continental Army could win. It transformed Washington from a struggling commander into a symbol of perseverance and strategic resolve. Still, the war was far from over. In 1777, British General John Burgoyne attempted to execute a bold plan: march south from Canada to cut off New England from the rest of the colonies. Initially confident, Burgoyne's army moved slowly through difficult terrain, facing harassment from American forces and logistical challenges. The campaign culminated in the battles of Saratoga. There, American forces under General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold encircled Burgoyne's army. In October 1777, Burgoyne surrendered. The victory at Saratoga was astonishing. It marked the first major surrender of a British army in the war. But more importantly, it convinced France that the American cause had real potential. For years, France had watched the conflict carefully. Still smarting from its defeat in the French and Indian War, France saw an opportunity to weaken Britain. After Saratoga, French leaders decided to act. In 1778, France formally allied with the United States. This transformed the revolution from a colonial rebellion into an international war. French money, troops, and critically, naval power would prove decisive. Yet, even with French support, American independence was not guaranteed. The winter of 1777-1778 at Valley Forge tested the Army's endurance to the breaking point. Soldiers lacked shoes, blankets, and adequate food. Disease spread. Hundreds died. And yet, the Army did not dissolve. Under the training of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, the Continental Army underwent professional reform. Drill, discipline, and organization improved dramatically. What emerged from Valley Forge was not merely a surviving force, but a more capable one. Meanwhile, the war shifted south. British commanders believed that Loyalist support in the southern colonies would allow them to regain control more easily. They captured Savannah in 1778 and Charleston in 1780. The southern campaign became brutal, characterized by guerrilla warfare and shifting loyalties.